Welcome to the Educate a Girl podcast series. Educate a Girl has set the goal of providing 1,000 young women from 5 continents with scholarships in journalism and media training to strengthen women's voices in media and improve professional gender representation in the field. This series acts as an educational platform for students, professionals, and the recreational listener. Each podcast explores a topic in media and journalism featuring a special guest. Our speaker today is Randy Boswell, a journalism professor at Carleton University. Boswell attended Carleton as a student. After journalism school, he worked mostly for the Ottawa Citizen, the main daily newspaper in Ottawa. He then became a member of the National Bureau for Post Media, the parent group for the Ottawa Citizen. For about a decade, Boswell worked as a national reporter with special interests in history, the Arctic, science, and cultural identity, to name just a few. He talked about community journalism and getting started in the field.
Community journalism is part of community building. Journalism is a way of telling stories and keeping people informed about things that are going on in their local place. Journalism is an important binding agent. It's something that helps people connect with each other and to learn about what's going on in their communities, the good things, the bad things. And so journalists, I think, deliver their information in many different ways these days, and it's people of all ages and from all walks of life, because even the whole definition of a journalist is really changing. But it's people who tell stories about the place where they live. That's the simple definition of what a journalist does.
And so how do you find those stories in your community?
Well, I think it's important to engage with the life of your community. So if your community is a place where there are, let's take a simple example, sports happening. When I was a young resident of the village where I lived growing up in Canada, my entree into journalism was writing stories about the sports teams that I was actually playing on. The baseball team, the local hockey team. And so one part of journalism is simply letting everybody in your community know what's going on. And so one of the functions that I was playing at that time was informing people about what the midget baseball team was doing, who they played against, whether they won or lost, etc. And so in the very simplest form, you're just spreading news about what's happening in your community. But that can evolve into more challenging kinds of journalism, like attending city hall meetings or, local government council meetings, whatever form those might take around the world. Then you start to find out about competing interests in your community, the people who want to build something, the people who don't want it to be built, the people who want to do something that might affect the water quality, the people who don't want that to happen. These are the kinds of things that journalists at the local level tend to get really interested in and write about, and it's a really big service for the other residents of those communities. If it weren't for journalists who spread the word about these causes or these conflicts or these achievements, whatever it might be, then the community is impoverished. People in the community don't know what's going on. People are not connecting. And then what happens is that only after the fact do people start to complain about something or see a missed opportunity or whatever it might be. So journalists play a pretty important role in linking people and ideas and giving momentum to projects and movements and criticism and all of those kinds of things.
And so would you recommend finding one thing that you're particularly interested in and focusing on that, or is it better to be a jack of all trades?
The answer is both and everything. It's always a good idea to follow your nose, to follow the things that you are personally passionate about, because it's a lot easier to summon the energy and the expertise to write, to blog, or whatever it is that you're doing about things if you are interested in them and more knowledgeable about them. But at the same time, it's important for journalists to be curious people, to kind of fan out and look for things that they maybe don't know much about, but feel it's important to learn about because it's some issue that's going to affect their community. It's something that a lot of people are really interested in, but even if you're not. And so journalists need to kind of have their antenna out, to be thinking about how they can connect with their community, specifically about things that other people in the community are really interested in as well. So it's a combination. You need to follow your own passions, but you also need to be perceiving what other people are getting excited about, interested about, that kind of thing.
Okay, so you found the story and you are ready for the next step. What should you do next once you have that idea?
The really critical thing that journalists need to do is identify stakeholders. And those are the people who are involved in an issue, and those people are going to provide the different perspectives that you can bring to any particular issue or news event or whatever it might be. One of the things that distinguishes journalists traditionally from people who just, are trying to convince other people about something is that journalists are gathering different opinions from different people and presenting them usually in a neutral fashion, in an objective fashion. And so if there are a lot of people with different opinions about a proposed bridge being built across a river in your community, then a journalist's job is to go and scout out the people who are for it, the people who are against it, and give everyone who has a strong opinion and an informed opinion an opportunity to present that opinion. So identifying other people who have useful input to provide is a key function of what journalists do. I mean, that's really the most important. We're not just people with strong opinions ourselves. We are primarily a conduit for other people to express their opinions. And so one of the first things you have to do if you are an aspiring reporter covering things happening in your community is to identify the important voices and to ferret out voices that maybe are underreported and not heard, and so give them a voice through your reporting. But that's a really important function because ultimately we are, putting microphones in people's faces and getting their input into major issues, and we're taking notes and we're filming interviews and so forth, and that's really a key function.
And sometimes it can be intimidating when you're going to meet somebody for the first time and you have researched a lot about them, but you're not sure exactly what they might say. So how can you prepare for an interview?
Well, there was two things you said there that are important: prepare and research. One of the wonders of the internet, for those who have access and are comfortable moving around in that incredible information environment, is that you can really learn a lot about issues before you have to go out and start interviewing and gathering information from people directly. So every issue usually has a very long history, lots of background information, all kinds of previous news stories that have happened related to most issues, not always, but usually there's a rich backdrop to draw from. It's important to quickly familiarize yourself with that background information so that you can speak intelligently and ask questions intelligently when you encounter a potential source. The other thing you need to do is you need to go to places. I mean, I just talked about, sitting down at a computer and getting lots of background information. That's only part of the job of a journalist. The other part of a job of a journalist is being there to witness things that are happening, to be on hand, to record events that are occurring, speeches that are being given, demonstrations that are happening on the streets or whatever it might be, depending on exactly what the issue is. And of course, that includes things like going into people's homes and talking to them about their issues or their causes or whatever it might be, and generally going out into the community to capture stories, to capture opinions, to gather information. So it's a combination of doing lots of background research to prepare yourself, and then it's going out into a community center, a home, a hospital, a business, and then contacting and dealing with people directly.
Okay, so now you've done that step and you've done your interviews and you've done your research, and now it's time to start writing. When people generally start approaching the writing process in community news, what's the first thing they need to remember?
The first thing they need to remember really is that all of that preparation work that they've done and all of the time they've spent informing themselves about the issues involved is time that other people have not spent. And so they really have to put themselves in the shoes of those who have not done all that research, have not spent the time learning about an issue, and realize that when they communicate what they now know about that issue, they have to keep it simple. They have to understand that everyone else out there is learning from the story that you're writing or broadcasting or whatever it might be. And so when I teach my students, I spend a lot of time talking about orientation. In other words, making sure that readers are not left behind because you know a bunch of stuff about a story, but they don't know anything. And so you can't lose them in the complexity of an issue. So you really have to peel it back. You have to think very clearly about how you're imparting the information so that people can understand the background, can understand how this came to be, can understand in clear terms the different perspectives that are out there on a given issue. And so that's a really important mindset that a journalist has to have, is the ability to say, okay, I know a bunch of stuff here, but I've got to spoon feed it in some way to my readers. You have to keep it simple. And at the same time, everyone's skills vary on this front, but you want to be compelling. You want to tell the story in ways that are entertaining and engaging. That means if you are covering a high school basketball game, you're focusing on the most dramatic moment in that game. And you need to know enough about the game of basketball to understand that that incredible jump shot with 3 seconds left was the highlight of the game. Part of what journalists do is they seize upon symbolic moments like that in order to tell a story in the most captivating way. So a story about that game would not begin, the two teams arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning and they warmed up for 2 hours and then the game began at 10 and here's what happened in the first quarter, here's what happened. No, you do not want to give a chronological account of that thing. As a journalist, you have the power to say, I'm going to focus on the most dramatic thing that happened, and then I can tell a bit more of the background and how this all came to pass. But I really need to grab readers at the start with something compelling. And obviously, in a case like that, that wonderful moment at the end of the game where the fans went crazy because that jump shot went in and it won the game, that's the thing you got to start with.
You spend a lot of time working with students and overseeing students who are new to print journalism and community journalism. So what are some of the common missteps or mistakes that they make when they're first starting out?
Journalists should be in the business of trying to maintain a neutral stance and offering an objective perspective on a particular story. And that means, in some ways, burying your own personal opinions about a subject and making sure you're giving other people who are involved in a given issue the opportunity to express their views. One of the things that journalists do sometimes is they infuse a story with their own bias, their own opinion. And that's not really the primary job. There are parts of journalism where commentary is welcome and that's part of the whole, big universe of journalism. But for people who are starting out in the craft, an important thing is to focus on balanced, fair journalism. These are very fundamental principles about the principal task of a journalist, to bring a wide variety of perspectives to a particular subject, to find things that people are interested in, as I talked about before, and to be balanced in your coverage, not to just inject your personal opinion, but to find other people to provide their opinions and give their viewpoints. You really only learn how to be a reporter by doing reporting over the long haul, repeating over and over again. So when you're in a school program, you might get the opportunity to do 10 or 15 stories over the course of your entire education at the school. And that's really helpful to kind of get you launched. But if you live in a community and you have a potential outlet, whether it's a local news organization or whether it's just your own blog, doing journalism and reading other people's journalism is a pretty good education. You can't really just, kind of make it up out of your head how to do this. You have to see how others are doing it. You have to look and reflect critically on how they're doing it, what they could have done better, maybe what you know about some subject that didn't get into that story. Learning and reading and constantly immersing yourself in the world of journalism is a really important way of becoming a journalist, right? And so doing it, absorbing it, ingesting it every day, whether it's on TV, whether it's on the internet, whether it's in the physical form of a newspaper or whatever it might be. All of those things are important to do to try to get into the milieu of journalism and become part of that milieu.
Thank you for listening to the Educate a Girl podcast series. To learn more about Educate a Girl, visit our Facebook page.